More now on punishing sanctions facing Russia for its war in Ukraine. We have reestablished our contact with Klisman Murati. Klisman, I just want to ask you, we've seen one round of sanction after another, mostly on Russia's financial institutions and banking sector. How effective are sanctions when you're talking about Russia in changing behavior?
Well, we're about to see, aren't we? These kinds of sanctions are really used for the most extreme cases. We see instances of them being used in North Korea, in Sudan, in Venezuela. So actually limiting access to capital and also limiting the ability for the Russian central bank to repatriate some of its FX reserves is going to hit Russia. But I think we also need to realize that Russia has huge amounts of oil demand, and revenues from that will probably keep it afloat to a certain extent. But for sure, sanctions are always a good thing if you're trying to bring a nation back into international law compliance.
Well, as you mentioned, we've seen similar economic and financial sanctions. You mentioned Venezuela, also Cuba, Iran, and the government in all these countries, the government they're trying to punish still stands, and the one who seem to hurt the most are often ordinary people. Are we going to see the same kind of impact in Russia?
No, I don't think sanctions are there to have regime change. Sanctions are there to at least make it a lot more difficult for a nation state to conduct ordinary business. So the hopes are that with all the Western companies and others who have essentially stopped operations, who have divested also from Russia, that this will send a very clear signal to Vladimir Putin that his actions are not tolerable. But unless I think Putin escalates his military endeavors by aiming his fleet to a NATO country, then we may see more escalations by NATO. But currently, this is the best thing that the West can probably do to bring a nation back into compliance with international law. It's not the most perfect way, and it's not the most surgical way to do it, but it's the best way that we have invented so far.
What other options does the West have, Klisman? And talk about this global power index.
Yeah. So the first thing that we need to realize is that a nation state is there to pursue one specific interest, and that is power. So the way in which we define power is the ability of a nation state to secure its own interests. And through different mechanisms, they're able to do that. And in our latest Global Power Index for 2022, Russia, in fact, ranks number 2 in the world of the most powerful country in the world. So the country which is able to secure its own interests the most. The US is ranked number 1, and China is ranked number 3. So playing in the same ballpark, these 3 countries, and we can see the extent of Russia's ability to impact the world, not only militarily, but also ramifications from the West, because naturally these sanctions not only hurt Russia, but also in part harm the countries which have done business in Russia previously by stopping income from that country and also disrupting the ability for employees in that country to earn a living. So Uber, Visa, MasterCard, plus many more have now come out of Russia, which is not only going to impact the economic viability of these countries operating there, but also for the people who made an income and made a living, it's going to impact them more. But this Western alliance or global Western alliance has really shown the power of Western nations put together to impact Russia, and the Global Power Index is a way in which we measure this and allow investors and policymakers to better act upon it.
So sanctions clearly hurt Russia, and sanctions hurt all these companies doing business with Russia. But what other options do Western countries really have here?
Well, the 2 biggest things that a country can do when trying to bring a nation again back into international law compliance, because that's all really would be their aim right now, nothing more. So you have diplomatic negotiations and you have sanctions. And you hope that these will work to an extent on a nation like Russia. But naturally, Mr. Putin or President Putin has his own vision as to what he wants to achieve. And the question always comes down to this: what happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force? And we're about to find out. So Russia is penetrating Ukraine much more so, and the West is trying its best to facilitate a defense of Ukraine, not through direct kinetic means, but through facilitating it through the supply of weapons and other ways of support. And this picture will play out in the coming days, months, and years, I think, to see what the major impacts will be.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Klisman Murati, we appreciate it.